In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at one of the most useful tools I've bought in a long time. And here it is. This isn't a laptop. Let me explain. So this device, while it looks like a laptop, isn't. It's an interesting classification of device known as a lapdock. Not a laptop, not a lapdog, a lapdock. Essentially, it is the hardware of a laptop, but without the computer inside it. So you have a screen, in this case a touch screen, you have a keyboard, a touchpad, audio, built-in battery, all that stuff, just no computer. Instead, you connect this to other devices. So essentially, this is just a portable monitor, keyboard and touchpad in a single unit. And this is something I've been wanting for a very long time. And I just didn't really know what it was called. It was one of those things that you know you want it, but you don't know what it's called, so you can't find it. But I finally came across it. Now, the concept of a lapdock started back in, I think, 2011, when Motorola released their Atrix smartphone. And this was a standard-looking Android smartphone. However, they sold an optional lapdock accessory that you could connect the phone to. And if you connect the phone to this dock, it kind of plugged into the back of it using a micro HDMI and USB connector that both plugged inside the phone. If you connected the phone to it, the phone would boot up into a sort of Linux desktop environment that ran on the lapdock. So you kind of use your phone as a laptop. Now, needless to say, this didn't really catch on. It died out very quickly. I think they released a couple of iterations of it, and then a few years later, Microsoft, or I think HP released an iteration on a Windows phone. Again, didn't really take off. But nowadays, these devices are starting to gain traction again. Many modern smartphones, such as my Samsung S23 Ultra, have some sort of inbuilt desktop environment. So in the case of Samsung, it's known as DeX, and what you do is you can connect the phone to a screen either using a cable or sometimes using wireless casting, and the screen will show a desktop environment that you can either interact with using the phone's screen as like a touchpad and keyboard, or through connecting an external keyboard over a USB cable or Bluetooth. Well, with the popularity of that, these lapdocks have now come onto the market again. And the idea with this is you connect your smartphone with a cable into this lapdock, and the lapdock runs a desktop environment. Which is all well and good if that's the sort of thing you want, but realistically, it's not something I'm ever going to use or really have any interest in. If I'm going to carry around a device the size of a laptop, I'll just carry a laptop, and realistically, everything's in the cloud nowadays, so it's not like I have things on my phone I want to work on the go that I can't get on a laptop, so that's not really the use case I'm buying this for. But now that you can get these devices thanks to that use case, they can be used for many other things. And what I want this for is to use as a sort of portable KVM or crash card. So if I need to set up a server or a desktop, either on desk here when I'm just setting up for a video, or if I want to say I'm in the field and I'm like in a data center and I need to connect to the server and there's no crash cart available, or even thinking back to a few weeks ago, I was working on a machine on the roof of a building that's doing radio equipment, long story, but the machine had crashed and we needed to plug a monitor, keyboard and mouse into it to try and work out what had happened. And this involved lugging a monitor, keyboard and mouse up a ladder in a bag, and it was very sort of janky. With a device like this, I have a single device I can just pick up in one hand that has a full keyboard, monitor and touchpad in one device, which is going to be really useful. This will be absolutely fantastic as a sort of sysadmin tool. If you're interested in buying all this, obviously there's links in the description. But what we'll do in this video is we'll go through, we'll take a look at it working, talk about the different use cases with it, do some tests with the screen and stuff like that. Then we'll take it apart and see what's inside. But for now, let's take a look at the model we have here. There's a bunch of different models of these devices. They're sold under a few different brand names: Dopesplay, UPerfect, NextDock, and a few others. Some of them are kind of unique designs. A lot of them are kind of generic designs like this that all the brands sell the exact same product. So this is from Dopesplay, which is the brand that I went for. I just went for whatever one was the cheapest, so that was Dopesplay. Again, links in the description. And this has the model number of a DR138. This is one of the more entry-level models, which has a 13.3-inch screen. They do ones with bigger screens, 14-inch, I think maybe 15-inch. They're all generally 1080p screens, including this is a 1080p 13-inch screen, so being a bit smaller doesn't really matter. And at the time of filming, this costs around about £180. So it's not pocket money, but it's also not stupidly expensive. Now, annoyingly, you can actually now buy laptops about the same price as this, but I wouldn't recommend buying a laptop that costs £180. But overall, for the sort of device you're getting, it's not too bad, and it will pay for itself for me in terms of how useful this is going to be. So yeah, this is the model I went for here. As you can see, we've got the 13.3-inch 1080p screen, the big keyboard here, and then the trackpad. Now, the only thing I noticed is that the keyboard is an ANSI layout, so it's like an American ANSI layout with a sort of single row enter key and long left shift key. Now, if you're in the US, that's going to be completely normal to you, but I'm in the UK where we have ISO keyboards, so this is an ISO keyboard, where you can see the enter key is double height and the left shift key is smaller. It's just one of those things. One's not better than the other, it's just when you're used to ISO and you're going to ANSI here, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but realistically, for the sort of use case I have with this device, it's really not a problem. So you've got the keyboard here. So that's it there, you've got some speakers along the top, some LED indicators just to show status. If we close it and take a look around the ports, you can see on this side we have some I/O. So around on this side we have a 3.5mm headphone jack, a USB-C DC input, so this is purely for charging it. You can plug a charger in there to charge it. A micro SD card reader that connects the device over USB, and a power switch. Next up, looking on the other side, we see some more useful ports. So we have a USB-C port, and this is the one you connect to your device. So if you plug your phone into this, it'll connect with the phone for USB for all the keyboard and touchpad integration, as well as video from the phone over that. And then optionally, you also have a mini HDMI port. So you can either plug in a device that supports video output over USB-C, or you can plug in a device over HDMI. And if you plug in a device over HDMI, the USB-C port will still work for carrying the keyboard, touchpad and touchscreen. So if you were to say connected to a computer, you could connect HDMI for video, and then plug the USB-C cable into one of the USB ports in the computer, and that would connect with the keyboard and touchpad and everything. Now, unfortunately, it is mini HDMI. It's not full-size HDMI. I think it's just to make the device thinner, but at least it's not micro HDMI. Mini HDMI is a little bit annoying because you need to have a specific cable, although it does come with one in the box. But unlike micro HDMI, it's a reasonably durable connector. Micro HDMI I have on this camera, and it absolutely sucks. I'm filming through micro HDMI right now, and it is the most flimsy, fragile connector. Mini HDMI isn't too bad, so I can kind of let it off on that. So yeah, that's your I/O. You can either plug it into the device over USB-C if the device supports video output over USB-C, or you can plug it in over HDMI and just use USB-C for the keyboard and touchpad. It's a really neat little solution. So yeah, it's the device there. Feels pretty well made. It's kind of, I think it's aluminium on the outside. I think it's either aluminium or like that kind of plastic that feels aluminium. It feels pretty decent quality. I think the palm rest assembly, I think that's plastic. Yeah, that's plastic there, but I think the outer shell is aluminium. And what's also nice with this is if you're looking at the hinge design, this is one of those kind of 2-in-1 type devices. So you can have it like this, like a laptop, but you can also fold it around into a kind of tent mode like that. You know, you can kind of stand it up like that, or you can stand it like that, which is something I've never really bothered with. I've never actually had a 2-in-1 machine, but for a device like this is actually really useful because you may not always want to use it with an external keyboard and trackpad. You may just want to use this as a secondary monitor, as a sort of portable monitor for a laptop. And with this, you can do that. You can just flip it around, stand it up like this, or stand it in kind of tent mode and have it as a secondary monitor next to your laptop, and you don't therefore need to have the keyboard sitting in front of it. So that's pretty nice. So let's look at the hardware. So now let's take a look at it working. So what we'll do is we'll flip it around and then we'll power it on. So obviously, as I mentioned, this device has a built-in battery. We'll talk about that a bit later. But if we power it on right now by holding this button on the side, you'll see it'll start up and say Dopesplay, which is the brand. And then once it turns on, it will say phone book, because I think, again, relatively generic device, that's kind of the branding that they're putting in the firmware here is phone book. And you know it's a top quality device when it says PLS Connect devices. Yes. Pulse Connect devices. But it actually works pretty well despite that. So yep, we're now on. So now let's take a look at this working. So now as the first demonstration, we'll take a look at connecting to a smartphone over USB for Samsung DeX. Even though this isn't really what I'm going to be using this for, I may as well demonstrate its kind of intended use case first. So plug a USB-C cable in there. This cable comes in the box. It will work with most USB-C cables, but they have to be a decent quality one. Not all cables have enough bandwidth to work with devices like this. It's one of those things. USB-C is one cable to do everything unless the cable's not the right standard, in which case it won't work. It's a bit annoying, but yep. Plug the phone in with the USB-C cable. The phone's already unlocked. Give it a second. Samsung DeX starts up. And here we have a desktop environment. So this is DeX if you haven't seen it before. It's kind of like a desktop environment hosted from the phone. It's just Android. You can kind of go through here, and as you can see, the touchpad works. You can see the mouse cursor moving around there. The touchscreen works. The touchscreen doesn't move the mouse cursor around, but I can click there, for example, pull that up, say open up a web browser like that. That now opens like that. We now have a web browser. Again, mouse cursor works. We can click on a search box. We can type text in. Keyboard works. It just works. So essentially, you can now use this to use the device like a laptop. It actually works really well. Touchscreen works pretty responsively. Pinch to zoom is pretty good. It works pretty well if this is the sort of device you're going to want. While we're in here as well, we'll also take a look at the on-screen display. So there's also an on-screen display as part of the Lapdock. So this isn't part of the Samsung DeX experience. So even if I unplug the phone, it'll still work. So if I unplug the phone, it'll go back to that sort of welcome screen in a second. There we go. And if you swipe down here with 2 fingers, like that, it pulls up an on-screen display. This works even if you've got a source in it as well. It's like the on-screen display of a normal monitor. And when you're in here, you can kind of change things like the volume, the backlight brightness, the contrast and brightness, which is more the contrast and brightness of the picture, not the backlight brightness. Various settings here to switch the inputs, although they do auto switch. You can mute it, you can sort of lock the rotation because it's got rotation. If you turn it upside down, you can flip the orientation, all that kind of stuff. And then on the second screen here, you've got options to adjust the red, green and blue and color balance and stuff. So you do have some options in here if you want that. But now with that out of the way, let's take a look at this connecting to a laptop, because that's more up my street. I'm not really that bothered about this whole Samsung DeX type of thing. So to demonstrate this, here we have my Framework laptop. And I'm using this because it's a relatively modern laptop, so it supports DisplayPort output over USB-C. So we have the Lapdock here. We're going to just plug the Lapdock in. So as before, USB-C cable into the side of the Lapdock. Other end of the USB-C cable into a USB-C port on the laptop. Just like that. Give it a little second to all think about it and connect up. And there we go. We now have the laptop. And this is a dual screen setup. So if I were to say, open up a file browser on the laptop, just like that. And then we can say, move this between the two monitors like that. It works just like an extra monitor. It's pretty simple. And on top of that, the keyboard and touchpad are also now connected up, so we can come down here, as you can see the trackpad works. We can say drag the window around using that, just like that there. The keyboard works, you can open the window, well, it's open on the other monitor, but start menu comes up, we can type things in there. Keyboard works completely fine. And even the touchscreen works, so I can now use this as a touchscreen. So that works really well. Now, of course, with this use case, it's a little bit weird because why would I want a laptop to sit next to my laptop? And then two keyboards that you kind of have to still move the mouse between, so you could be typing away on this keyboard, but you're typing something on this screen. There's no real point having it like this. But this is where the two-in-one nature is really, really useful. Because what I could do is instead of this, I could just flip this round upside down, do that, give it a little second to realise it's been turned upside down, the screen will auto-rotate, and there we go. Now I've got this as a second display, so this can sit next to my laptop like that, and just act as a second monitor. Or if I find I'm not a fan of this kind of tent style, it's not great for ergonomics or getting the right screen angle, I can flip it around like this instead. The screen will once again auto-rotate correctly. And this can again sit off to the side of my laptop. And now this works absolutely brilliantly as a little second portable monitor. I remember back in the day, years ago, I think when I was in university, I used to have a little portable monitor. It was a little USB Lenovo one. And it was absolutely brilliant for working where I didn't have a separate monitor. But back then it was a USB device, but it used DisplayLink, so it was a kind of driver-based solution that wasn't great for that. Whereas nowadays with the USB-C, I have a single cable to an external monitor, plug it into my laptop, and also have the bonus of in this external monitor also having a keyboard and touchpad and everything if I need it. So it's all well and good using it as an external monitor, but that's not really what's really good about this device. Sure, it works as an external monitor and it's a really nice feature to have, but external monitors like this have been around for years. What really makes this unique is the keyboard and touchpad. So let's take a look at a use case for that. And that is setting up things like desktop PCs and servers that don't have a built-in display. So here, for example, we have this little Dell Optiplex 5070 desktop PC. You'll be seeing this in a future video. I've got a project that I'll be using this in, which will be quite interesting. And this is the perfect use case for this device. I have a little PC that I need to set up. This isn't being set up on any kind of desk anywhere where I would just set it up on the desk and sit there at it and set it up. This machine is going to be used as a server, so it's going to be kind of configured here for remote access and then put away connected to the network. So I just need some sort of monitor, keyboard and mouse to connect to this just to set up the operating system, set up remote access and then disconnect again. Traditionally what I would have to do is go into a cupboard, bring out a big monitor, big keyboard and mouse, set them up on the desk, plug them all in, find power cables and all that kind of stuff. It's fine, it works fine, but it's not the neatest solution and it's a little bit of a pain. And that's just for me here at a desk where I know I've got a monitor in a cupboard behind me. If I was out in the field somewhere, that could be a real pain. You're digging out monitors from cupboards and all that stuff. Whereas instead, I can just use this. So if we look around the back of this machine, we've got some I/O. So this machine only has DisplayPort. It does have USB-C on the front, but this doesn't output video over USB-C. This is just a pure USB connection. So if I connect that to the Lapdock, it wouldn't work for video. You wouldn't get video out over that. And the only video outputs we have are DisplayPort. So we'll need to use some adapters. Now, as I mentioned, this device has mini HDMI on the side, and it comes with a mini HDMI to HDMI cable in the box, which I have here. Of course, I also need to connect this into DisplayPort, so I've got a bit of a bodgy adapter right now. I've just made this up from adapters that I had spare. I've not bought any adapters for this project. So we have this mini DisplayPort to various interfaces adapter. It's one of those things you had many years ago when laptops had mini DisplayPort and nothing else used it. You'd carry one of these around with VGA and HDMI to connect to things. But it has HDMI, so it's mini DisplayPort to HDMI. That's what I need. And then because it's full-size DisplayPort, I've got this mini DisplayPort to full-size DisplayPort adapter. So we'll connect these two together and plug that into the PC. Of course, you wouldn't necessarily need to do that. You could just get a... If you're regularly setting up devices like this, you could just buy a full-size DisplayPort to mini HDMI cable. I'm sure those exist as a single cable, but I'm just working off of what I've got. So with that adapter in there, we plug the HDMI cable into that, plug the other end into the lapdock, and away we go. So plug that into there, and that's now connected. But of course, that's just HDMI. All that'll do is carry video from this. It'll work great as a monitor, but I won't be able to interact with the computer. But all we need for that is a USB-C cable. So we have a USB-C to USB-A cable here. Plug one end of that into the lapdock, like that. Plug the other end, this USB-A end, into the computer. And that's now the keyboard and touchpad connected up. So now what we need to do is plug a power cable into the computer, like that. And then if we turn it around, we can turn the PC on. That should be starting up there, I think. Nope. Come on. There we go. These details are a bit of a pain. They take a little while after you apply the power to actually let you turn them on. But if we give that a second. There we go. Yep, that's it starting up. So, as you can see there, PC is now starting up on the lapdock. Just give it a second for Windows to boot. Let it log in. And there we are. We're at the desktop of this PC on the lapdock. So there's no need to faff about with a big monitor, keyboard and touchpad. It's all in this little portable device. So now with that there, we can see it'll work. So now we have the trackpad working. That's working over the USB-C cable. We can open up the start menu. We can type something in. There you go. The keyboard works. It all works brilliantly. And as you can see, this will be over the USB cable. So if I were to unplug that there, you know, the keyboard no longer works. Trackpad no longer works. That's all using this USB-C cable. So if we plug that in again, that'll all now work again. And on top of that, even the touchscreen works. So within Windows, over a separate USB-C cable like that, USB cable like this, just into a USB port, even the touchscreen works. And it actually works pretty well. Now at this point, we'll talk about the overall quality of the device. The build quality is really pretty good. It feels pretty solid. In terms of usability, in terms of the keyboard and touchpad and screen, it's kind of the level of a cheap laptop. You know, if you were to buy one of those very cheap sort of £200 laptops with some sort of 32 gigs eMMC storage and a Celeron embedded chip, those really, really cheap laptops, it feels a bit like that to use. So it's not brilliant, but it's fine for the sort of stuff I'm using it for. The keyboard itself is reasonably responsive. I found some of the keys you need to press a little bit harder than I would expect, but they're not too bad. Once you get used to it, it's fine. I think it's the sort of thing that because I've not used typing on this, it's a little bit different to what I'm used to. Bearing in mind I'm used to a MacBook Pro with a very nice new style Magic keyboard, but it's not too bad. I think the only thing I've found is the keys are maybe a little bit bigger than other laptops I'm used to, so it takes a little bit getting used to. I kind of mistype a little bit, but it's fine. The keyboard isn't too bad. Now the trackpad on the other hand isn't great. I'll be first to admit that. In terms of tracking, it's not too bad. It's pretty accurate, but it's got one annoying issue, and it's that it uses tap to click, but also has physical buttons. However, when I say physical buttons, it's not doing what most laptops that have physical buttons do, where there's a physical click button along the bottom, and if you click on the left of it, it will left click, and if you click on the right of it, it will right click. On this device, it has that similar behavior, but it's not using a single button and working out where you're clicking to decide on whether you're right or left clicking. Instead, there's a physical button for left click and a physical button for right click. So if you click on the left, use the start menu as an example, click on the left, that will click, that will left click. If you click on the right, that will right click. But if you click in the middle, it's only left clicking there because of what I'm clicking on, but that's actually clicking both the left and right click buttons at the same time. You can kind of hear a double click. Don't know if that's coming out on camera, but you can maybe just about make that out. That's a little bit weird. But the more annoying issue is tap to click. So it supports tap to click, which is nice. You know, you can just do that. You can tap anywhere and it clicks. But the problem with this is if you click in the bottom left-hand corner using the physical click, but quite quickly. So if I just click like that using the physical click button, that works fine. But watch what happens if I click the physical button in the bottom left-hand corner quite quickly with my finger lifted off. You see the start menu opens and closes again? What's happening here is I'm clicking the physical button, which is registering a click, but because I'm also putting my finger on the touchpad and letting go quickly, it's also registering that as a tap, and it's sending them both as clicks. So I essentially end up double clicking. So if I just do that and click the physical button, it double clicks. And this gets pretty annoying if you're not used to it, because especially, for example, if you've got a bunch of windows open full screen and you click the close button in the corner of one of the windows, you'll double click and it'll close that window and the one behind it, which is really annoying. Realistically, once you get used to it, I can just about deal with it just by purely using tap to click. So just forgetting that it has a physical click and instead just only tapping to click. And if I want to right click, you can tap with 2 fingers and that will do a right click. I'm actually tempted to open this up and see if I can try and remove the physical click buttons, because that would actually get around it and just have it purely relying on tap to click. But it's just something to bear in mind. It would be nice if there was some sort of option to disable tap to click. I can't seem to find it. And it seems to just present itself to the PC as if it's a mouse, which makes sense because you want this to be compatible. You don't want to be relying on touchpad drivers installed on the PC. But it does just mean that the trackpad isn't great. Now, for the use case that I have, where I'm just using it to quickly set up PCs or diagnose machines, it's absolutely brilliant and it's not a problem at all. You wouldn't want to use it full time as a machine, but in terms of this kind of use case, it's absolutely fine. Additionally, there's also a shortcut key here to disable the trackpad. So if you're, say, working and you're instead wanting to, say, just use a touchscreen like that, or you're using an external mouse and you don't want the trackpad getting there because it kind of doesn't have the best palm detection, you can disable the touchpad. All you do is press FN, F1. That disables the trackpad. It puts a little light on there to indicate the trackpad's disabled, and now the trackpad won't work, but the touchscreen will continue to operate. And to be honest, using the touchscreen actually works pretty well, so I'm not too bothered. It's also worth mentioning these function keys. What they've done that's actually quite good is, even though the shortcuts are the bigger symbols and the function symbols are smaller, they actually do the function keys by default, and you have to press FN to get the auxiliary functions. And this is really good, because for my use case, I'm going to want to use this machine to enter the BIOS on a PC. So if I need to mash F2 or F12, I can just mash that key and it'll work. I don't need to hold down FN and then mash that, because they actually do the function keys by default, not the sort of shortcuts. So that's actually quite nice. Additionally, most of these just kind of control this device itself, not the connected PC. So for example, if I press FN and then brightness, that just adjusts the backlight on the Lapdock itself. Same for mutes and stuff, the audio shortcuts. These don't adjust the sound on the PC itself, they just adjust the volume levels on the Lapdock. So you don't need to have any driver support for these shortcuts, these just control the Lapdock itself. Additionally, there's also a backlit keyboard, so you can use that button there. Keyboard lights up. Don't know about that coming across on camera, but it's a decent enough backlight, so maybe if you're using this in a dark room, a dark server room or something, it's nice to have a backlight. So yeah, it's nice to have that there. But yeah, overall, it's a really nice device. Touchpad isn't the best, but in terms of general usability, works pretty well. And now, while we're talking about sort of overall performance and build quality of it, let's talk about a couple of tests I did. So the first test I did was battery life. Now, I will admit I haven't done a full drain test on this because the battery life is very good and I've not had time to physically fully drain it down and charge it back up in a kind of scientific way. But what I did is I ran it on full brightness and minimum brightness as 2 independent tests, where I ran it for an hour and measured how much the battery dropped. And I was just using the built-in battery meter on the device itself. So these tests do assume that the battery drains linearly on this battery meter. I haven't verified that, but on full brightness for an hour, it dropped around 19% battery. And then on minimum brightness for an hour, it dropped around 9% battery. So if we scale these up to sort of 100% battery, that would give about 5 hours of battery life on full brightness and around 10 hours of battery life on minimum brightness, which is pretty good, especially for the kind of use case I'm going to use this device for. And obviously you can just plug it into a USB-C port, dead easy just to charge. And it's good, you do have that separate charging port, so you can easily have it connected to the device over a USB cable and continue to charge it from the mains. You don't need to have to unplug it and charge it separately. You know, right now it's sitting set up like this. I can just take a charging cable, plug it inside there, and it'll charge. Although it won't actually charge because this cable isn't plugged in at the other end, but you get the point. You can charge it while you're using it, so that's pretty good. The other test I did was the screen quality, and it's not great. Out of the box, the colours look quite washed out. It doesn't look too bad here, but that's because I've adjusted the brightness and contrast controls. If we set these to both to 10, the middle part, which is what they're like out of the box, you can see it looks quite washed out. Now, I don't know how this comes across on camera, maybe it doesn't quite reflect it accurately, but it's not the best screen in the world. The colours are quite washed out and not particularly accurate. We'll zoom in a little bit there so you can see it clearer. But yeah, as you can see out of the box, this is the out of the box setup, it's quite washed out. Now, you can go into here and adjust the brightness and contrast controls, and I found it on mine, if I dropped both of those down a bit, it gets a bit of a more usable display, darkens it a little bit, but the colours look a bit more sensible. Of course, that's not very scientific, so I did a proper test. I used my X-Rite Color Monkey color calibrator, spectrophotometer type thing, and used software called DisplayCal to properly calibrate and test this display. So this is going to get a bit technical, but in my testing, I found this had a maximum brightness of around 238 nits, which, to be honest, isn't dreadful. Now, sure, a high-end laptop nowadays is like 500 nits, but 250 odds, 230 nits or so, the 238 I measured here, that's round about on par for a sort of low-end laptop. So it's not too bad. It's not the brightest thing in the world, but it's still usable in a reasonably bright room. In terms of coverage of colour spaces, it's not great. It has 79% coverage of sRGB, 64% of DCI-P3, and 58% of Adobe RGB. Which isn't great, especially given the listing on the website on AliExpress did say 100% sRGB coverage, which maybe isn't accurate. Now, this may be problems with my testing. My testing is not great. I am not an expert in doing this, but I measured 79% of sRGB. I've also done the same test on other devices that do have 100% coverage of sRGB, and they've measured 100% coverage of sRGB, so my testing does seem to work. Now, whether this is a case that maybe the panel's capable of 100% coverage, but the scaler in here isn't capable, I suspect it's something like that. But yeah, you get 79% coverage of sRGB. Now, it still works fine, it's still usable, but you're not going to want to use this for colour accurate work. You know, maybe if you want to use it as a secondary monitor, it's fine to maybe have your email on, or have, say, a chat window on, but you wouldn't want to, say, edit a video on your main monitor and have this sitting off to the side as your kind of reference monitor. That would be a bad idea because of the sRGB coverage. Additionally, I measured the delta E. This is getting a bit more technical, but what delta E is where you test your monitor and it will test it with various different colours and measure the colour that the monitor displayed. The delta E is the difference between the colour that the monitor was meant to display and the colour that the monitor actually displayed. And the smaller the delta E, the more accurate the colour is. When you measure a monitor, you test it with a bunch of different colours and shades, and you get a delta E for each of those, and then you take an average. And in this case, with its stock out-of-the-box configuration with the brightness set to full, and the contrast and brightness here set to 10 just as the stock out-of-the-box configuration, I got a delta E average of 11.4. Now, to give some context, a delta E of less than 1 is seen as like an unperceivable colour difference. The colours look basically perfect. Between 1 and 2, you can start to tell differences in colours if you're looking really closely. And then above 2, that's a perceivable colour difference at a glance. So the colours will look different even at a glance. And that's at greater than 2. This scored 11.4, so the colours are not accurate out of the box at all. However, what I then did was I calibrated it. So I used my colour calibrator and generated a calibration profile. And with this, I got the delta E down to 1.6. So it's still not less than 1, but it's still at that point where it's only perceivable if you're really looking closely. You wouldn't want to use it for colour accurate work, but calibrated, it's not too bad. So I do suspect maybe they just haven't even calibrated this at the factory very well. It's a bit weird, because once you install that calibration profile, it actually looks pretty decent. I mean, it does look decent without the calibration profile. If you adjust the brightness and contrast, you can get a pretty good result. I mean, I'm not got an internet connection on this, but you can see, with this, it doesn't look dreadful. But with the calibration profile installed, it did look quite a bit better. Now, of course, to generate this, you need to use a device like this, and these are quite expensive. I mean, even a cheap monitor calibrator starts at about £100, and this one's even more expensive. But what I've done is I've linked the calibration profile I made in the description. Now, it's not the best practice to use other people's calibration profiles because the whole point of calibrating a monitor is to calibrate the differences in manufacturing tolerances between your displays. So say, for example, on my desk, I have a pair of identical monitors, but each of those monitors is calibrated separately and has its own calibration profile, and each calibration profile for the two identical monitors from the same batch is slightly different. There are variances between the two monitors, and the whole point of having those different calibration profiles is to bring the monitors to be the same. So if you install my calibration profile, if you bought one of these, it won't look as accurate as this, and it won't probably get a delta E of 1.6 because your device will be slightly different to mine. But I found it made such a difference, it may be worth trying if you bought one of these because it might just slightly help and get you a better colour accuracy. Now, of course, when you're installing colour profiles, you're not installing colour profiles to the Lapdock itself. Instead, you're installing the colour profile onto the computer. So if you're using this as like a portable monitor, you could definitely install the colour profile onto your laptop or desktop that you're using it with, and then anytime you connect the Lapdock, the color profile will work. But it's not the sort of thing you could upload the color profile to this and it'll work with every device you're connecting it to. You need to install the color profile onto every device you're using. But realistically, it's fine. I'm going on about the colours just because I wanted to kind of be fully clear if someone's wanting to buy this for an external photography reference monitor or something, the colours are not accurate. But for day-to-day use and the stuff I'm using it for here, it's perfectly fine. And being an IPS panel, it's actually got pretty good viewing angles, it's perfectly bright, colours are reasonably vibrant once you've played about with these controls here. It isn't actually too bad. It just doesn't really hold up with high-end monitors in the testing, but it's perfectly usable. So as a final example, let's take a look at my main use case for buying this device, and that is for setting up servers or using it as a crash cart in a data center. So here we have a server, this will be coming in a future video, but like most servers, in fact almost any server, even the modern brand new high-end ones, all it has is a VGA port. And this is quite common, because in data centers you have what's called a crash cart, which is, if you're lucky, a sort of nice fancy trolley with a built-in monitor, keyboard and mouse, although in most cases it's a dodgy desk on wheels where half the wheels have fallen off and an old monitor, keyboard and mouse on it you have to kind of hobble through the data center like a wonky shopping trolley. And most data centers do have that, but sometimes someone else is using it, sometimes it's broken, or sometimes you're in a situation where you're, say, in a comms room that doesn't have one. And at that point you end up trying to scavenge monitors from places. So I decided to buy this because it means I can just chuck this in a bag, and I know that I will absolutely have a suitable KVM on me. But of course the server is VGA only, and that's because most crash carts are VGA only, so it's what people are generally used to. But not to worry, all we need is an adapter. So for an adapter, I've picked up this, which is a cheap little HDMI to VGA adapter. This one is branded Benfi, and it's a pretty cheap little thing. What's important here is that you get one that is VGA to HDMI. Most of these adapters are HDMI to VGA, so connecting an HDMI device to an old VGA monitor. This is a slightly less common one, where you're connecting a VGA device to an HDMI monitor, but they're easy enough to get, so that's what I've picked up here. So all we do is we plug VGA into there, and HDMI into the Lapdock. Now, with this device, because it has an active conversion, and because it's going into a VGA device with an HDMI monitor, it does require power, so it also uses a USB connection just to power it. I think this one also has some weird thing where it has a built-in audio interface that can act as a USB audio interface. That confused me for a while, but yeah, USB for power. So all we would do is plug VGA into the server and plug HDMI into this, and then plug this USB cable in for power. And then as before, we would use a USB-C to USB-A cable to connect the keyboard and touchpad up. Now, one extra thing I've bought for this system is this. And this is just a dodgy looking USB splitter, but it actually makes a lot of sense. With this setup here, I would need two USB ports on a server. One for the keyboard and touchpad, and one to power the HDMI to VGA converter. Now, in the vast majority of cases, that's absolutely fine. I mean, this server has 4 USBs on the back and 2 on the front. Most servers will have at least 2 on the back and a couple on the front. But there are situations where you might only have 2 USB ports. In particular, the one I'm thinking of is Dell's R630 and R620 generation of servers. If you buy the 10 drive bay variant of that, it doesn't have any front USB-A ports. The other versions do, just not the 10 drive bay version. So on those, all you'd have is a pair of USB ports on the back. And if you were to plug this in, of course, you could power this and connect your USB keyboard and touchpad up, but then you'd be out of USB ports. So as soon as you want to, say, go and plug like a flash drive in to install an operating system, well, you're out of luck. So I picked up this little cable here, which looks dodgy, but essentially it's a USB-A cable connector on one end here, and then it splits out to 2 USB connections on the other end. One of these carries power and data, so essentially it's a straight pass-through. The other one only carries power. And this is ideal for this, because what I can do is I can take the USB-C to A cable that's connecting the keyboard and touchpad up, plug that into the data connection, because that'll carry the data through for the keyboard and touchpad, and then separately plug my HDMI to VGA converter into the power only side, so that will only power it and not connect the data up. And now this whole assembly here can now be powered through a single USB port. So I can just plug that single USB port into the back of the server there, then plug the VGA cable into the back of the server like that, plug the USB-C connector into the Lapdock, just like that, open the Lapdock up as well, then get the HDMI cable, which I've helpfully thrown off camera. Here we have it. Take the HDMI cable, plug the micro HDMI or the mini HDMI end into the Lapdock, plug the full-size HDMI end into the adapter, and with that sort of cable set up there, we can just turn the Lapdock on, just like that. And then all we need to do is power up the server. So turn the server on there. This one will get quite loud. But with that, it'll boot up on the Lapdock. There we go. So yeah, there's a server running on the Lapdock, and wait for this to boot up, I will be able to configure it. And there we go, the machine's now booted up, as you can see here. We can use it. Machine's now fully working, and I can now administer my server using this Lapdock. And this is just such a neat little form factor. I can just carry this single device around, a few cables, and administer any server with essentially a portable, like rucksack-sized crash cart. It's absolutely brilliant. So you may be looking at this setup here and thinking, well, if you've got all those adapters, surely that's just equally as complicated as, you know, getting a monitor out. But not really. What I've done is I've made up a little kit. So what I did is I picked up this cheap little laptop sleeve. It's just a cheap little Amazon thing that fits this perfectly. And then I went out and got a selection of cables to basically allow me to connect this to anything I'm likely to come across. So obviously I've got the VGA one I've demonstrated before. I can also just connect straight into HDMI. I've got mini DisplayPort to HDMI. I've got the ability to connect it to full-size DisplayPort. I've even found this old DVI to HDMI adapter, which I will admit I haven't tested, but I'm just keeping that in the kit anyway because I think it would work. And then I can just keep them all in this bag. So I've just got all these cables here, which I can just take out, and then just keep them all neatly kind of arranged in this bag. Slot them in the front there. Get all my cables. Just packed away like that. Just stick them all in the bag. Don't know why I'm filming myself putting things in the bag, but anyway, I'm doing it now. Chuck all the cables for the Lapdock kit in that bag there. Seal up the cable compartment. Take the Lapdock. Slide it into the sleeve like that. And with that, I have my full KVM kit in a device or a case this small. And you've got to admit, to have an entire monitor, keyboard and mouse in something this size is pretty great. And all I need to do is just chuck this in a bag. When I need it, just take the Lapdock out, pick the appropriate cables I need out of it, set it up, and I can just pack it away again. So essentially I've just made up this little kit. And all the cables that are in here, I just keep in here. I won't borrow them for anything else. I won't use them for anything else. They live permanently in this case. So it's always ready to go. So I can grab this and I know that I have an ability to connect to any of the devices that I have a cable for. So yeah, that's kind of how I've made this into a kind of portable KVM kit. Works pretty well. So as a final part, I thought it'd be interesting to pop this open and see what's inside. So there's an absolute ton of Phillips screws around the side of it. I think they're Phillips 1. I've already briefly popped this open, but I've not properly looked at the components yet. But what I noticed is that all the screws are different sizes. I mean, they're not all different sizes from each other, but there's many different sizes of screws. So if you do take yours apart, just be very careful to keep the screws sort of marked as to the positions they've come out of, because yeah, with all the different sizes, it would be very easy to, you know, put the wrong size screw in the wrong size hole and then damage something. So yeah, we'll get all these screws out and then we'll see what's inside. So we've got all these screws around the outside that you can see, and then there's also 2 screws hidden under these feet. So there's 1 screw hidden under each foot, so you'll also need to take those out. So again, just be careful, make sure you don't forget to take those out, because that's how you break something, where you take all the screws out, you think you've got the screws out, you then force it open, only to find a screw that was hidden under something. So carefully take all these screws out and just make sure I lay them around so I can easily put them back in the right place later on. So yeah, I'll get all these out off camera, get it open, then we'll take a look inside. Okay, so I've now opened it up and I've now carefully moved all the screws off camera. As you can see, we can now see inside it. Once those screws are out, it's easy enough to take it off. All I did was first of all lift it off at the side with the USB-C and the HDMI ports. Lift off that side and then slide it off the other side, because the power button pokes through the case. So you need to kind of slide it off that, not try and open it from the power button side first. But yeah, with that open, we can now see inside. And as you can see, it's mostly battery. You've got a giant battery which has comically large text that looks like a giant mobile phone battery. And you can see a couple of circuit boards with various chips on it. So what I'll do now is I'll go way off camera, look up the little part numbers on the chips, try and work out roughly what we have here, and then we'll come back and talk about it. And we're back. So I've now dug into a little bit, got some part numbers off the chips, so let's talk about it. So as you can see over here, we've got one big main chip, and this is an RTD2556T. And this is an HDMI to EDP driver. So it'll take HDMI video in, and it'll output EDP, which is like embedded DisplayPort, which will be what the LCD panel will use. So that's essentially going to convert the HDMI through to the display. These chips generally do a bunch of other stuff as well, so chances are things like the on-screen display is also handled by this chip. I can't confirm that, but these devices they're used on a lot of little sort of portable monitors and LCD driver board type things you can get, so it's likely this is also handling the on-screen display and a lot of the logic. Next up here is a tiny little chip, which is from Microchip, and this is a USX2064. And this is just a USB hub. So as you can see, when we go into more detail throughout this, there's a bunch of different peripherals that use USB, so it seems to just be a USB hub that connects all those to the USB port. Speaking of USB, we have a chip just below this here, which is an LDR6282. And this is a USB-C controller. So this handles things like USB power delivery, when it's providing power out of this port to things like a phone, and it also handles things like multiplexing different signals onto the USB port, and this one explicitly lists that it supports DisplayPort alt mode. So this will also handle the DisplayPort video coming in over the USB-C connector. There's also a couple of microcontrollers. We have one here which is an SH61F83Q, and one down here which is a Nuvoton N76E003. These are just little microcontrollers that will just be handling ancillary functions of this device. Next up, over on this board here, we have a couple of chips. We have this long chip here, which is a Wingcool chip. It's not really got a part number, it's just the brand Wingcool, but that seems to be a touchscreen controller. So I suspect this cable coming in here, it comes from the touchscreen, and it goes to that controller there that handles the touchscreen control. Below this, we have a little chip which is just under this tape here, which is a GL823K. And this is a USB SD card reader. So essentially you've got the SD card slot here, this is a reader for that, and that'll connect onto USB, presumably going up to this hub. And then finally down here, we have another chip here, which is an LDR6321, which is a USB PD controller. This is the side that has the charging port, so this will handle the charging coming in to charge this device. The only other things I could really find of interest are over here. We have these two little chips here, which are XA8873 audio amplifiers. So there'll presumably be one of these for each audio channel, or one of these for the built-in speakers, one of these for the 3.5mm jack, I'm not sure which. But yeah, that'll kind of handle the audio. The audio will come out of this chip here, and it'll be kind of sent to the internal speakers and 3.5mm jack. And then all you've got is this big ribbon cable that connects these two boards together that goes under where the battery was. Then you've got this big ribbon cable here that'll be for the keyboard matrix, and this which is for the touchscreen. Not the touchscreen, sorry, the touchpad. And this little additional cable here, I suspect that's going to be for something like the keyboard backlight. In fact, it is, because it actually says key LED there, so that'll be the keyboard backlight cable there. All pretty simple. Does look like you won't be able to get the touchpad out because this is kind of all riveted in, but yeah, it seems pretty good. I mean, it's not something you're really going to need to service anyway, so yeah, seems absolutely fine. But speaking of servicing, we have the battery. And what I'm pleased to see is that the battery is removable. Now, unfortunately, they have been a bit naughty and lied about the capacity. On the listing on AliExpress, they stated this had a 10,000 milliamp hour battery. As we can see on the actual battery, it's a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. Now, that's quite naughty that they have lied about the battery, but equally, a 10,000 milliamp hour battery and something like this is a bit silly. So as soon as I saw that, I was quite skeptical. I suspect it's the sort of thing that because this is one of those products that lots of different companies are rebranding under their own name and everyone's selling the same kind of product, they're kind of just one-upping each other on battery just to kind of give a bigger number than the other brands. It's the same thing as you get with like cheap LCD projectors, where the lumens value is essentially just made up. They kind of just pick a value out of thin air just to beat the next cheapest competitor. It's one of those things. So yeah, it's a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, so it's not really the real capacity they rated, but realistically, the battery life's pretty good. I mean, for context, this is 38 watt hours for essentially a monitor, keyboard, and touchpad. This framework laptop is 55 watt hours. So, you know, you're almost close to the capacity of like a real laptop, and this has like a full CPU and everything. So 38 watt hours is realistically plenty for this type of device. So a bit annoying that they've lied, but it is a perfectly good battery capacity. But what's positive to see with this is that the battery is easily removable. It just plugs into this little white connector that's under some tape here, and there's a few screws that hold it in place. So this means that you can easily replace the battery. That's model number of it there, and I've looked it up online, and it seems to be quite a commonly used battery. It seems to be the sort of battery that's used in lots of those cheap laptops. The ones I mentioned earlier, those £200 all-soldered eMMC laptops that just are basically e-waste. Those going back many years seem to have used these batteries. So they're quite widely available as spare parts. So if you did buy one of these lapdocs and the battery failed, you could probably easily enough source a replacement. I mean, there's no saying how widely available these will be into the future, but it's at least there's a standard battery that is replaceable just with a few screws. So if the battery did fail, you could probably get a replacement and fit it. I've also tested it without the battery installed, and it will happily power up without a battery installed just from a plugged-in USB-C cable. So that's good as well. You know, if you bought this and this is the sort of thing you'll buy and probably use for many years, if many years down the line the battery failed and either you didn't want to get a replacement or you couldn't get a replacement, you could at least power it off of a mains power supply or a suitable power bank. So yeah, it's good that the battery is replaceable, just a bit naughty that they lied about the capacity. But yeah, let's get this back reassembled and wrap this thing up. Okay, so I'm just in the process of putting this back together. I've got the battery in, and I've just come up with one slight mod I'm going to do before I put this back together. And that is basically make the trackpad so it's harder for me to click it, just to get rid of that weird tap to click double clicking issue I was having. So, as I mentioned earlier, I can't really get the trackpad out because it's all kind of riveted in, but I found these little bits of adhesive foam. I have no idea what they came with. They were in like a random drawer of little bits of foam pads and stuff that I've hoarded from random things over the years. But they fit perfectly in this little gap between the trackpad and the battery. I don't even need to stick them in. If I just kind of wedge them in there, they sit in there absolutely fine. And they're about the same thickness as the battery. It's just very lucky that they fit. But what I've found is if I put those in and put the bottom case on, they don't obstruct stuff in any way. They seem to fit fine, but they just make the trackpad that bit harder to click. So rather than it being really easy just to click the button on it, you can still click the physical button, but you now have to press quite hard. So I'll put these in and see how I get on, because I think having these in there, it'll just make it harder for me to do a physical click. So I'm more likely to do tap to click, and I'm less likely to sort of press it down and have that weird double click issue. Plus, because it will require more force to click down, I'll probably have to press harder and therefore click for a bit longer, so it might not have that issue because I won't be able to come and just sort of naturally just tap like that, do a physical click, and then also tap to click. So we'll leave these bits of foam in there now and see if that helps. Hopefully that'll kind of alleviate that trackpad issue. So yeah, time to finish up getting this back together. Okay, so that's all now reassembled and it's working. I've not broken it, thankfully. And that touchpad mod I did actually works really well. So as I mentioned, it just makes it much harder to click down. So if you look here, I can still physically click down on it and click the button, but it requires quite a lot of force, same way I can sort of right click as well. But it just requires a lot more force. So now if I'm say want to just tap to click, say when I just tap to open start menu, do a tap to click, I can tap pretty hard in this area here, and it'll click once because it no longer triggers the button. The button used to be quite light to press, so if you're just to tap in that area slightly too hard, you would click the physical button and end up with that double click issue. So yeah, that mod has actually worked pretty well, so yeah, that's pretty good. But there you go. That's a look at one of the most useful tools I've bought in a very long time. This thing is absolutely brilliant. I've had it for a couple of weeks now just to test it out and sort of get a good feel of it before I made the video. And I've just found so many uses for it, just setting up little machines like this or testing out little servers or things like Raspberry Pis, just being able to quickly plug this into something and just keep it in a little bag on a shelf ready to grab is absolutely brilliant. It's so much easier than having to dig out monitors and keyboards and mice and plug them all in. This thing is an absolute lifesaver. So yeah, really happy with this little thing. But yeah, there you go. Thank you very much for watching, and if you're interested in buying one of these, there's links in the video description.